Hi, my name's Josh Puckridge. I'm recently appointed as the CEO of Energy EE1 on the ASX. That was in May, just recently. For the last month, I've been working at EE1 and very excited to bring our upcoming developments to the market. I've recently been working at Steam Resources for the last 2.5 years in the Australian geothermal industry, where we were able to pull together one of the world's largest geothermal exploration and development projects, both in the Northern Territory and South Australia. I'm particularly excited to be working at EE1 with regards to our South Australian package, which hosts some of Australia's most prolific and most advanced geothermal wells from 15 years ago at Paralana 2 and Blanche 1.
Good morning, and thank you, Josh, for joining us here at NWR Communications to allow us to ask some of the key questions that we receive on Earth's energy and geothermal. As you mentioned in your own introduction, you are one of the more experienced geothermal executives here in Australia, having been part of that and running that private company for a number of years. And I know from talking to you, you're a huge believer in the baseload potential of geothermal and how these new generation technologies will revolutionize the renewable energy industry and supply, both here in Australia and globally. And I know you joined Earth's Energy to cement its position at the forefront of that geothermal renaissance. So great to have you on board, and great to have you here this morning to answer some of these pertinent questions that we less specialists get asked on both geothermal and the company you've joined, Earth's Energy EE1. When we did get involved with Earth's Energy, I remember reading an article in the influential Wired magazine, and the headline was "Geothermal Everywhere, Finding the Energy to Save the World." So a big ticket statement. Obviously, you perhaps believe in it. Is it a bit of an exaggeration, or is geothermal going to save the world?
Look, geothermal's got a real role to play in the energy transition and just the general energy addition of society. In terms of geothermal being everywhere, it's definitely everywhere at depth. The reality of geothermal comes down to finding exploitable geophysical characteristics that can be harnessed and drilled into economically and feasibly. So what we've seen around the world is that over the last sort of 15, 20 years of geothermal development, we've seen what I would call the low-hanging fruit of these hydrothermal systems, where they have their own fluids, they're already flowing, they're hot, they're sort of being found by natural occurrences as opposed to systematic geological exploration. But Australia doesn't have many of those, if any at all. We do have some in Queensland, but the vast tracts of Australian ground are what we would call hot dry systems, where they're a bit deeper. But what they have as an advantage is that they're a lot bigger. And when I say bigger, I mean their strike lengths are bigger. So we see, particularly in our South Australian project at EE1, the potential for bringing in technologies that have been refined around the world, specifically to exploit systems like ours, being hot, dry rocks as opposed to hydrothermal systems. And a lot of that development started in South Australia 12, 15 years ago by groups like Petrotherm. Whilst that was probably overly ambitious for the time, what we've seen is why there hasn't been a lot of activity here in Australia other than for the last 3 years in geothermal. What has happened is around the world, particularly out of places like Houston in the United States, we've seen the refinement of those technologies and engineering standards that now really bring an exciting time for geothermal in Australia, because we're looking at bringing some of those practices and technologies back home to Australia, where we can quickly start building the Australian geothermal industry and story.
Thank you, Josh. I think a key question or misconception that leads to a question we receive all the time is geothermal. It's just all about hot springs and volcanoes, right? So obviously what you just said, that's not the case. Maybe expand on why and
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's exactly right. So with regards to Australia, most of Australia is very stable geology with hot, dry systems. We're obviously a very well endowed country when it comes to a lot of things, but vast tracts of desert. So what we've seen around the world over the last couple of years is really how to develop projects like those in Utah and Houston in the United States, where they're equally similar geology, similar desert style projects that don't have those free-flowing volcanic hot fluids. And so we look to two major developments that have been around for a while, but they're only finally now being developed in a way that could be regarded as investable, where the sort of the capital required can come in at a lower risk to warrant the investment in the capex. And what we're seeing there is that the work of particularly Fervo and Forge out of the United States is bringing in enhanced geothermal systems where we drill down and then we inject our own fluids to excavate that heat to the surface. And that is one of the two or three technologies that we're looking at as being a bit of a game changer for the great land holding that Earth's Energy has in both South Australia and Queensland.
As you mentioned, Josh, Australia is dry and arid, and geothermal has been attempted here before. It was 15, 20 years ago, so a lifetime ago in technology terms. But why didn't it work in the past? And maybe dwell again or delve into what's changed in those last 15, 20 years.
Yep. Look, the main thing that I think, which is why we're sitting in such a prime seat to really bring this back to Australia, is that it was just over ambitious what Petrotherm and Geodynamics were attempting 15, 20 years ago. The engineering has caught up. We've seen significant investment in the States privately and also government funded in the United States to develop these technologies and engineering. In the case of Fervo Energy, they've really led the way for enhanced geothermal systems. And we're at a stage now where the targeting errors associated with pilot wells is borderline non-existent, meaning that we can do a lot of the work up front without the risk of expending significant dollars on deep drilling campaigns where we're not sort of more certain of the outcome. So we're looking at a much lower risk, higher outcome scenario than we did 15, 20 years ago.
So what are those key advantages of geothermal, Josh, and enhanced geothermal systems versus other renewable power alternatives? Obviously, a lot of press at the moment around nuclear and the need for baseload in Australia. So what does this bring to the table?
Yeah, and baseload power is the tagline. That's certainly the main one of the main benefits of geothermal, but that means a lot. Baseload means that it's we're not beholden to the wind, not beholden to the sun being up. Baseload power is the promise of 24/7 reliable renewable energy, and that's something that wind and solar can't deliver. We've seen that in practice. That doesn't mean that solar and wind don't have their places working within power grids and working within baseload providers such as us. But the ability to rely on that power, regardless of conditions outside of the control of the company, is really the promise of geothermal.
So you recently joined Earth's Energy, EE1. Why is it Earth's Energy, and why will it be part of the solution of the geothermal puzzle here in Australia?
Earth's Energy is sitting on some of the most prolific geothermal ground in Australian history. Paralana 2 was really one of the catalysts to the enhanced geothermal sort of run of 15 years ago. Whilst that didn't work at the time for reasons that we've discussed, where the engineering wasn't quite there, it was quite an ambitious project of Paralana 2, or drilling out Paralana 2. Whilst it wasn't there and it was over ambitious for the times have caught up, and we can really pick up where that was left off by Petrotherm sort of 15 years ago, and we can lean on the sort of international community to come in and not have to really recreate the wheel, but really take advantage of those developments made by Fervo and Forge in the United States to really revisit those projects where we know a lot of the geophysical characteristics already. And it's a revisit. It's a pickup where it was left off. It's not a start from scratch, which is what I see as EE1's competitive advantage right now in the global geothermal space. Whilst Australia is behind the times of geothermal, we've got all the characteristics of being able to catch up quite quickly.
Right. So great run through, and geothermal does sound like it has that massive potential both globally and here to supply that baseload power we also desperately need. But as now running a listed entity, how do you see that translating into value for shareholders, both in the near term and longer term?
Yeah, well, as I just alluded to, I think there's some great value that can be unlocked with our international community. The geothermal community and industry has not just re-emerged here in Australia, but globally. It's at an all-time peaked interest. Obviously, catalysts such as the global energy transition, moving towards a carbon neutral environment. Geothermal has a huge role to play in that, and EE1 stands to gain from that transition in every way, but largely from being able to very quickly develop Blanche 1 and Paralana 2 by not reinventing the wheel, but by really what you would almost call a second mover advantage by working with larger groups outside of Australia, being largely in the US, but also in Europe, to really get Australia back up the curve and start exploiting some of these great resources that we have, because they are world class.
Thank you, Josh. Maybe just to sum up, shareholders are always hungry for news flow. What should we be expecting to see in the next 6 months from Earth's Energy, and hear from yourself?
Yeah, well, I expect that they'll see a lot. We are really moving quite quickly and working very hard to basically bring some reality to what I've just been discussing. In particular, a focus on what we're sitting on, and the real value there is all the work that was done 15, 20 years ago. We know what's there to a large degree. It's really a matter of bringing in those groups who we can work with to transmute that engineering into not just exploration, because the exploration is largely done at some of our prospects, but really an engineering story of how we propose to be a geothermal power producer.
Thank you, Josh. Exciting times for the geothermal industry and exciting times for Earth's Energy. So looking forward to pitching more questions at you in the not too distant future. And I'm sure the progress over the next couple of months will be evident for all to see.
Thank you very much, Hayden.